Look who decided to show up again. Patricia Manning's voice cut through the pristine corporate lobby of Sterling Financial Group like a blade, loud enough for every employee and visitor to hear clearly. The same one who thinks she deserves special treatment just because she's expecting. Jasmine Washington, 26, adjusted her maternity blazer and gripped her portfolio tighter as she felt dozens of curious eyes turned toward her. She had spent the last 6 months applying for positions at various financial firms, and she never imagined that a simple follow-up interview would result in such calculated public scrutiny. Little did anyone know the executive in charge of the company had been watching, and the situation was about to take a turn that no one in that lobby could have anticipated. Everyone here can see, Patricia continued, adjusting her expensive blazer and gesturing dramatically, that this woman is trying to guilt us into hiring her with her condition. Sterling Financial is a prestigious company, and she thought she could manipulate our sympathy for single mothers. Robert Manning, Senior Vice President of Operations, stood beside his wife, looking uncomfortable but saying nothing. The same man who 3 weeks ago had personally called Jasmine to schedule this interview and expressed interest in her financial analysis background now avoided eye contact, as if those encouraging phone conversations had never existed. A receptionist whispered to her colleague nearby, "It's always the same story. These girls think they can get ahead by playing the pregnancy card." Jasmine took a deep breath, her voice coming out steadier than anyone would have expected. "I didn't come here to cause any trouble, Mrs. Manning. I just came for the scheduled interview. I have strong credentials in financial analysis and risk assessment." Risk assessment? Patricia laughed, though it sounded forced rather than genuinely amused. "How convenient. I bet that's just another way to say you'll be taking maternity leave the moment we invest in training you." "Sweetheart, you can fool some people, but everyone knows that people like you always find ways to take advantage of companies' diversity policies." What no one in that lobby could see were the small signs Jasmine had learned to hide, the way she analyzed every situation with precise attention, every word choice, every power dynamic, the composure that only exists in those who have weathered systemic discrimination and develop a resilience that goes beyond their visible condition. While Patricia continued her performance for the impromptu audience, Jasmine discreetly checked that the small recording device in her portfolio was still running. Every discriminatory comment, every public display of prejudice, every violation of employment law was being carefully documented. "I have nowhere else to turn for employment," Jasmine said quietly, her voice carrying just enough vulnerability to seem defeated. "But I know I can contribute meaningfully to this company before and after my baby arrives." It was at that moment that a commanding voice cut through the tense silence of the lobby. "Is there a problem here that requires my attention?" Everyone turned to see an elegant woman, in her 50s, watching the scene with a carefully neutral expression. Catherine Sterling, CEO and founder of Sterling Financial Group, had witnessed enough of the exchange from the executive elevator to understand what was happening. There before all the surprise and confused stares, Jasmine stood firm like someone guarding intelligence too valuable to be revealed before the proper moment. Because she had learned a crucial lesson during those months of rejection. When you have no connections or a family name to open doors, and when society judges you by your appearance and condition, you have to be more strategic than your opponents. If this story of discrimination and triumph touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to discover how a pregnant black woman would turn her apparent humiliation into the catalyst for a corporate revolution that would completely change the lives of everyone involved. Catherine Sterling observed the scene unfolding in her lobby with practiced attention, her experienced eyes catching details that others missed. As an entrepreneur who had built a financial empire in a male-dominated industry, she recognized the signs of someone being systematically undermined. "Ms. Sterling." Robert Manning finally noticed her, his tone instantly shifting to careful professionalism. "We weren't expecting you today. I was just addressing a scheduling confusion with a job applicant." "Scheduling confusion?" Catherine raised an eyebrow, her gaze shifting between Jasmine and the Mannings. "That's an interesting way to describe what I just observed." Patricia quickly tried to control the narrative, her voice becoming more measured. "Ms. Sterling, this is simply a human resources matter. This woman scheduled an interview, but there seems to be some misunderstanding about her qualifications and our current needs." "I see," Catherine replied neutrally. And what specific misunderstanding would that be? Jasmine remained silent, observing the careful corporate dance unfolding. Over the past months, she had learned to assess people with precise accuracy. Catherine Sterling wasn't rushing to judgment in either direction. She was gathering information. Well, Robert cleared his throat. The candidate situation presents certain practical challenges for a client-facing financial services role. We have to consider continuity and professional standards. Practical challenges. Catherine repeated slowly, her tone giving nothing away. It was then that Jasmine decided to speak, her voice calm but clear. Ms. Sterling, I graduated summa cum laude from Howard University with a degree in finance. I have 5 years of experience in investment analysis and recently completed my CFA certification. I believe Mr. Manning can confirm that my qualifications met the initial screening criteria. Patricia's expression tightened slightly. Qualifications on paper don't always translate to practical workplace fit. That's true, Catherine agreed, then looked directly at Jasmine. What specific role were you interviewing for? Senior financial analyst position in the corporate division, Jasmine replied. Mr. Manning and I had discussed my experience with portfolio risk assessment and regulatory compliance analysis. Catherine turned back to Robert. And what concerns do you have about MS? Washington, Jasmine provided. Ms. Washington's ability to perform those functions? Robert shifted uncomfortably. Well, there are questions about long-term commitment, scheduling reliability during her condition, and whether clients will be comfortable with, I'm going to stop you there, Catherine said quietly. Ms. Washington, would you mind joining me in my office? Robert, Patricia, I think we should continue this conversation privately. The change in atmosphere was immediate. Patricia's confidence wavered slightly, while Robert looked like he was calculating risks. Jasmine felt a shift in the power dynamic, but remained cautious. She had learned not to assume allies too quickly. You know what? Catherine said, addressing the entire lobby. I think everyone can return to their regular business now. As the crowd dispersed, Jasmine gathered her composure. She had documented everything she needed, but she sensed this was just the beginning of a much larger conversation. What no one except Jasmine had noticed was the way Catherine Sterling's expression had shifted when Robert mentioned client comfort. It wasn't outrage or immediate support. It was the look of someone calculating legal liability and reputational risk. The executive boardroom felt different from the public lobby. Here, the dynamics were more controlled, more calculated. Catherine Sterling sat at the head of the conference table, her expression professionally neutral as she reviewed the situation. Robert, Catherine began, help me understand the screening process for this position. What were the initial qualifications Ms. Washington met? Robert Manning had regained some composure in the private setting. Her educational background and technical credentials were strong. However, during our phone conversations, certain concerns became apparent about the timing and long-term viability of the hire. What specific concerns? Catherine's tone remained neutral, but Jasmine noticed she was taking notes. Well, the pregnancy obviously presents scheduling challenges. Training investment versus immediate productivity. Client relationship continuity. These are legitimate business considerations. Jasmine decided it was time to speak up. Mr. Manning, would you like to clarify what you meant when you said clients might not be comfortable with my situation? Patricia leaned forward. That's taken out of context. Robert was simply discussing professional presentation standards that apply to everyone. Actually, Jasmine said calmly, I have detailed notes from our conversations. Would it be helpful to review the specific language used? The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Catherine looked up from her notes. You documented your interviews? I take detailed notes during all professional conversations, Jasmine replied. It helps me track feedback and improve my interview performance. Robert's expression became more guarded. Note-taking is normal, but interpretation can be subjective. Jasmine reached into her portfolio and removed a small digital device. That's why I prefer objective documentation when possible. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Catherine's expression remained carefully neutral, but Jasmine could see her processing the legal ramifications. Ms. Washington, Catherine said slowly, Are you suggesting that discriminatory language was used during your interview process? I'm suggesting that your hiring manager made statements that might be difficult to defend in an employment discrimination claim. Jasmine replied calmly. For example, the September 12th conversation where Mr. Manning expressed concerns about how my pregnancy might affect client confidence in the firm's stability. Robert's face had lost color, but he maintained his composure. That's not what I said. I discussed general professional standards. Would you like me to play the recording? Jasmine asked quietly. Patricia looked between her husband and Jasmine with growing concern. The corporate calculation was becoming clear. This wasn't just a hiring decision anymore. This was a potential legal liability. Catherine Sterling's expression remained professionally composed, but Jasmine could see the CEO running cost-benefit analyses in real time. Mr. Manning, I think we need to review our hiring protocols to ensure full legal compliance. Of course, Robert agreed quickly. I'm sure any concerns can be addressed through proper documentation and training. Actually, Jasmine continued, her voice gaining quiet strength. There's something else. I've been documenting patterns across multiple firms. Sterling Financial isn't the only company where I've encountered these issues. Catherine's attention sharpened. This wasn't just about one hiring decision or one potential lawsuit. This was about systematic industry practices that could expose her company to broader legal action. How extensive is this documentation? Catherine asked. 6 months of interviews across 12 financial firms. 37 recorded conversations. Consistent patterns of pregnancy and race-based screening that violate federal employment law. The boardroom was completely silent. Patricia stared at her husband as if seeing him clearly for the first time. Robert looked like he was calculating his career survival odds. And Catherine Sterling was clearly running risk assessments on multiple levels. Ms. Washington, Catherine said carefully, what outcome are you seeking here? Jasmine had prepared for this moment. I want the job I'm qualified for. I want assurance that other women won't face the same discrimination. And I want to help Sterling Financial become a leader in equitable hiring practices rather than a defendant in a class action lawsuit. The offer was clear, cooperation or litigation. Catherine Sterling hadn't built a successful company by ignoring smart strategic plays when she saw them. I think, Catherine said slowly, we should discuss how Sterling Financial can move forward constructively. Robert, I believe you have some phone calls to make to our legal department. For the first time since the confrontation began, Jasmine allowed herself a small smile, not a triumph, but of someone who had successfully transformed a moment of humiliation into a negotiation of power. 2 years later, Jasmine Washington walked to the halls of Sterling Financial Group, but this time with a nameplate on her office door reading, Jasmine Washington, Director of Compliance and Equitable Hiring. Her office was strategically positioned on the executive floor, with clear view of the lobby where her journey had begun. Her 18-month-old daughter played quietly in the corner childcare area that had become standard in all Sterling offices, while Jasmine reviewed reports showing that the company's hiring practices had become an industry benchmark for legal compliance and diversity. The phone buzzed. It was Catherine Sterling, who had transformed from cautious CEO to strategic partner in building what became known as the Washington Framework for Equitable Employment. Jasmine, the Department of Labor just published their report. Sterling Financial is being recognized as the gold standard for pregnancy and racial bias prevention in hiring. 3 more Fortune 500 companies want to license our protocols. The Washington Framework, a systematic approach to eliminating discriminatory hiring practices that have been adopted across the financial services industry, not out of moral awakening, but because it was more profitable than facing lawsuits. And Robert Manning? Jasmine asked, though she knew the answer, took early retirement 6 months after the investigation. Patricia has actually become quite vocal about corporate accountability. She speaks at women's leadership conferences now. From her office window, Jasmine could see a young pregnant woman being interviewed respectfully in the same conference room where her own confrontation had taken place. The mandatory training protocols had worked not because they changed hearts, but because they changed legal liability calculations. You know what's interesting? Jasmine said to her daughter, who was playing with building blocks, sometimes the most effective change doesn't come from making people good. It comes from making discrimination more expensive than equality. Her transformation from unemployed job seeker to industry compliance leader hadn't been about moral victories. It had been about strategic documentation, legal leverage, and corporate risk management. But the result was the same: systematic change that benefited thousands of women who would never face the same barriers. The best revenge isn't destroying those who wronged you, she murmured, watching her daughter stack blocks with determined concentration. It's building something so valuable that they have to pay you to teach them how to do better. If this story of strategic transformation touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more stories proving that sometimes the most powerful change comes not from changing minds, but from changing the cost of discrimination.